Stand! Stand! Stand!
You want to dance? Ask me nicely. Let's talk. Better listen very carefully.
No problem.
You having fun?
No!
Thanks.
Hello, and welcome to Jean-Claude Van Damme, Episode 8, the podcast where we talk about Van Damme films because when he shows his dick to children, it's usually accidental. My name is Marcus Jones, and I'm your host, and joining me today is my friend Garrett Collins from Dead End Films, Binge Media, and the Bingecast. How are you, Garrett?
I'm fantastic. What a fucking intro that was. That's awesome. Yeah, man, I'm good. I was telling you before we went on the air, it feels good to actually be on one of these podcasts and not have to worry about how long it's going to take to edit it, if I'll be able to post it in time before my bosses get upset, and it's nice to actually be able to just chill and just talk, and I'm excited about today's show.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for joining me. I'll worry about all the editing and everything, and I don't have any bosses, so I'll put it up whenever I damn well feel like it.
Awesome.
So yeah, I just have to get this out of the way first. This is a first time for Jean-Claude Van Damme. This is the first time I have ever not seen the film we're talking about until this podcast.
Wow. And you call yourself a fan?
I know. It's ridiculous. There are a few blind spots in what I've seen, but so far I had seen everything prior. But for some reason, I just never caught this film. And also, I tended to get it confused with Desert Heat, which I also hadn't seen just because the covers were kind of similar. So let's start out by the usual way. Like, tell me what's your experience with Van Damme, where you first saw him, and what made you choose today's film.
Oh, my experience with Van Damme. Well, I've never met the man. I do have some.
Well, damn it! Why did I invite you on? I'm just trying to get an in.
Fuck, I'm sorry. I've never met the guy. But my experience with the guy his movies is I saw Bloodsport at a birthday party one time. They had rented it, and we had watched that and Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4 back to back, which was a crazy party. And when you're 12 years old and these kinds of parties happen, it's like, oh, it's like the coolest thing ever. And after that, I was kind of hooked, man. I will say, and this might get me kicked off the podcast, but I was always more of a Steven Seagal guy. But Van Damme,
that's fine. I don't understand why, but that's fine.
You know what? Honestly, I don't either. Especially since I've interviewed people affiliated with him and who have worked with him. I'm like, wow, what was wrong with that guy? I was more of a Seagal guy, but Van Damme, like Death Warrant, he just Double Impact, Universal Soldier. All these films were things that I always had like videotapes of. Like I had like Van Damme videotapes where they were just exclusively Van Damme films. But and then what made me choose this film? When you asked me, it's like, okay, if you were to do a Van Damme podcast, what film would you choose? I chose this one because it's a little. I don't want to say it's little known, but it's not really spoken about real highly when people talk about his films. It stands out as being a different film than his usual stuff, and its notoriety is crazy. I mean, I don't think people realize associated with this film, Marcus, we have Joe Esterhaas.
Oh yes,
wrote Basic
one of
Instinct.
3 writers.
3 writers, and did you catch the other writer?
Yeah, from the writer of Tango and Cash and Nightmare on Elm Street 5.
Yes, and we have Richard Marquand, who was the director of Return of the Jedi. So this movie has a lot of ties, and we'll get into it as we talk about it. But it's a very, very unique creature, and it was different. It was more of a drama than anything, but there is some Van Dammage, as you like to call it, which I love that phrase, by the way. But at the same time, it goes for more drama. Instead of like a woman falling in love with a robot, like what happened in Universal Soldier, we're having a guy in just kind of wanders into a situation that he has to find a way to get out of and bring these people out that he had just met. And that's just kind of, that resonated with me when I first saw it. I rented it on videotape, and it really, really resonated with me. I fell in love with it. And it's not really well loved, but I still watch it almost every time it's on.
That's fantastic. And we are talking about 1993's Nowhere to Run.
Oh,
I don't know
sorry.
if that was mentioned.
I'm sorry.
I don't know if
mention
either of us did. But yeah, no, like I said, this is something I had not seen before, which is weird because especially his 80s through 90s period, like I had seen pretty much everything, and it's mostly just some of the 2000 stuff I maybe haven't seen yet. But yeah, for some reason, this one just passed under my radar. I knew of it. I knew what it was. I knew who was in it. But yeah, just never caught it for some reason or another. And I'm so happy you chose this film. Because it's such a weird, simple story, and it has elements of some of his other films, because it does have like the kid element of like Lionheart and stuff like that. But I don't know, it's kind of special, and it was teetering on like how much I loved it, and it kept bouncing up and down, and we'll kind of get into that. But also the director is Robert Harmon, who directed stuff like The Hitcher and the 2002 Wes Craven produced They.
Yep.
But this dude is a worker. He made 8 Jesse Stone films with Tom Selleck in 10 years.
Holy Christ.
That is ridiculous.
That's insane.
And I guess before we get into the actual movie, I was looking around on IMDb, and someone posted in the message boards there, it was just 10 reasons why this movie is awesome. And I just want to read through these real quick. Okay, number 1, Van Damme. That's a given. It's a given. Number 2, the one-liners, which I have to agree with.
Oh, yes.
There are some good ones in here.
There are some great ones.
Number 3, Clyde's boobs. Pretty good. Pretty good. Number 4, the cinematography. Number 5, Ted Levine is Mr. Dunstan.
There you go. Yeah, I was going to mention him too. Yeah.
Yeah. Number 6, little kids making blunt, situationally uncomfortable statements, especially at the dinner table.
Absolutely.
Number 7, a very specific moment. The boy asks Sam if he's a bad guy, and Sam lays his gun down on top of a nudie magazine.
Wow.
8, tractor pull brawl.
Yes.
9, Steven Seagal plot, Van Damme execution.
Wow.
Which I think is a brilliant statement.
That is an amazing statement. Yes.
And number 10, finally, the bike hop, legendary.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. Marcus, I hope the Letterman people don't sue you for that, but that was a really nicely read list.
Well, yeah, exactly. I did a dramatic reading of it. But no, and I love that line, Steven Seagal plot, Van Damme execution, because it does kind of seem like that. And you said you were more of a Seagal guy. Actually, other than like Under Siege, like those 2 films, I had never really seen any Seagal movies until maybe the last year or 2, where I just kind of randomly started buying some. So I would see like Out for Justice and like Fire Down Below and The Glimmer Man.
Yeah.
Just like weird stuff like that, and Hard to Kill, like, and I kind of became a fan. Like, knowing what I know about him, I still despise him as a human being.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
Dude made some pretty good action movies in the 80s and 90s.
He did. We speak about it on our podcast all the time. The man, he had this run in the late 80s, early 90s where, I mean, there are 5 pretty good action films on his resume. And it was well known around that time. I'm not sure if you and I are around the same age or not, but him and Van Damme, they legitimately did not like each other, and they would go on talk shows and talk a lot of shit about each other. And it's.
I kind of feel like Seagal maybe had a little bit more to do with it.
Oh, positively. Because
that's the main reason why Van Damme is having a resurgence and a comeback, and everyone still kind of likes him and finds him charming, is because he rolls with the punches. He doesn't take himself too seriously. He's willing to laugh at himself, and he just likes to work. But Seagal's kind of a douchebag, so that's why he's still stuck in direct-to-video purgatory to this day.
Can I tell a great story that was told on our podcast by a man we interviewed, Michael Grays, who wrote Marked for Death, which was
absolutely.
It's one of my favorite films. They were meeting Seagal because he was really big at the time. I mean, we're not talking physically at this point. We're talking box office wise. He was really big at the time, and they had written the script for Marked for Death, and they wanted Seagal to do it. And they sit down, and Seagal goes, "Let me tell you about this idea I have. I want to do this movie based on my experiences in Japan." And the guy said, "Oh, well, let's hear it." And they hear the story that he tells about him being a bodyguard in Japan, and they take it to their big producer, and they say, "We really enjoy the story. We want to do it. Maybe do it in place of this Jamaican story that we did." And the producer looks at the script, and says, "This is Black Rain. He probably saw the script and thought it was about him, so he's trying to interject himself into the movie." This is the kind of individual Steven Seagal was.
He's like, Michael who? No, this should have been a Seagal film. Ridley who? What's an alien? I don't know. This is my movie.
It's just fantastic. You hear about that, but then you hear a lot of good stories about Van Damme. I don't know. I haven't listened to one of your shows yet, but I'd imagine that you don't really get into what his personal life was like. But I mean, he went through women like crazy in the 90s and 80s, and
we touch on that, and whenever I finally do a Street Fighter episode, there's probably going to be a lot of talk about that.
Oh yeah.
So that was kind of the height of all that. But yeah, we talked about that and a little bit of his personal stuff. But again, at the end of the day, especially at this point, it's more of like a redemption story.
Yeah,
him.
and he comes off as much more, I want to say likable and approachable than Seagal. And Seagal, I mean, everything from like the 2000s on, I could do without. But I gotta say, throughout the 90s and late 80s, I was a huge Seagal guy. But as time has gone on, and I've watched Nowhere to Run and all of his other films, I've become more of a Van Damme guy. So.
Well, that's good. And Van Damme, as far as I know, doesn't have a sex dungeon, so that's good.
Well, then I guess I better get off this podcast because I have.
I don't know if you knew about that story about, I guess, when he was shooting his show in Louisiana where he pretends to be a cop.
Yeah.
Apparently, like, he hired some woman to be, like, his assistant or something and was basically, like, holding her hostage in his house and trying to make her, like, his sex slave.
Holy mackerel, are you kidding me?
Yeah, there was a lawsuit that got settled out of court. But yeah, I think that's kind of what led to the end of that show.
Jeez. Wow.
Allegedly. I have to say that.
Uh-huh.
Allegedly.
Yeah, protect yourself, dude.
Yes, thank you. But I do also want to mention someone else that shows up in this film as the main bad guy, which is Joss Ackland, who plays Hale, like the evil business developer, who you might know as Hans from Mighty Ducks, or as Denomalos from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, who is kind of awesome. He doesn't get a whole lot to do in this movie, but he is such an evil presence.
Yes, he's one of those names that you recognize. You recognize him when you see him. Like, he was one of those character actors from the 80s and 90s that you definitely recognize. And I definitely recognized him. And there was also the bad guy from Lethal Weapon 2, which I wasn't sure if you were going to mention or not. He also makes a presence in Nowhere to Run.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Diplomatic immunity. That guy.
Well, that's the thing. Even there's a scene in this movie where Joss Ackland is talking to the people in the community, and he's telling them about how good it'll be for the community. And the way he's lit and the way he's talking is so evil. Like, it looks like he's reading something from Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey as the bad guy. And it's a weird mix of writers in this film, because you mentioned Joe Esterhaus, which this movie has the sleaze of that, but it's a little more restrained because he had two other people working with him.
Yeah.
But it has like the sleaze of like Sliver or something, because there is that kind of Tom element.
Yeah.
But it has like the sentimentality and the bad guy of like Ernest Goes to Camp. So it's a weird mix.
Yeah, and if we're gonna get into the movie, allegedly, well, actually not allegedly, she's come out and said it. Like, Rosanna Arquette did not want to do this film. She was dead set against it. The only reason she did it was because her manager said that Van Damme is a huge commodity. I think it'll get you more work if you do this. And lo and behold, the next year she got Pulp Fiction. So it did pretty good for her. But this is obviously a paycheck role for her. But it doesn't come off that well. I've always liked Rosanna Arquette as an actress. I've liked the entire Arquette clan as actors, and she does well with this. I believe her as a mom who is in this situation.
She does. She carries herself very well in this movie, and she's a good kind of like female lead / romantic love interest for Van Damme. But I do feel bad if she didn't like Van Damme and then like had to do those sex scenes with him and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because they got pretty intense. But this was actually a fairly decent hit. Like, kind of like all of Van Damme's films, they don't do great stateside, but worldwide, especially overseas and stuff, like, they do good business. So this is like a $15 million budgeted film. It made like over $50 million worldwide. So this is kind of in that string of hits that led to the following year, 94, where he had both kind of like his biggest hit and what's considered his biggest flop, even though it still kind of did okay, because he had Time Cop and Street Fighter the next year. And even though Street Fighter was like savaged by critics, it still did pretty well worldwide.
Did it really?
It did like 100 million worldwide.
Wow.
It only did like maybe 20 or 30 stateside, so it's seen as a flop. But like, again, Van Damme plays overseas, man.
Wow, that's incredible. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, and of course, Time Cop was another like $100 million film, so that's what led him to like kind of his peak in the 90s where he maybe got a little too full of himself and had to be brought back down some. But yeah, this is still kind of, I don't know, it's to the point where like he is kind of an established star at this point, but there's still kind of B movies that he's starring in and are getting popular from. So he doesn't really seem full. He seems like he's still really trying in this and still trying to be charismatic, trying to be a good action hero, and just seems like he's working really hard in this movie.
Well, he did this, and in the previous year he did Universal Soldier. Am I correct? Or I wasn't sure if Universal Soldier was the same year.
No, I think Universal Soldier was 92. So yeah, I think it was the year before.
So he was. Those are action. These are both action films, but I think there's more of an acting attempt going on in both those films. I believe, and you can tell in this, like he wants to be that likable guy from the outside who helps this family, and it shows in his performance here. Like I think he's trying to do something different than what people are used to, and I think that's why people kind of rejected it when it first came out.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like that happened to him a couple of, because like I said, this is kind of similar to Lionheart as well, but Lionheart was more along the lines of like the blood sports and kickboxers, but it had that family child element to it, which, you know, it happens. Your action stars have to have a kid in their movie sooner or later. But even though the writing for the kids is pretty terrible in this movie, you have like Kieran Culkin in here, who is fantastic.
Yes, he's really good.
Like, I know exactly, I can see why he grew to be such a great actor, because he is great as a child in this.
Yeah, he's really good. You mentioned the line of, you know, are you a bad guy? He delivers that line fantastic. He was really, really good in this. Back then, I mean, Macaulay Culkin was the one who was huge, but it's obvious in the years since that I think we had the better actor was Kieran.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and kind of, you know, the whole clan there, like Macaulay got in and out really quick, which is good for him, and that's probably what he needed. But yeah, Kieran went on to do really good work. Who was the other Culkin? The younger Culkin that has been doing like some really interesting, cool stuff recently, like Gabriel from like a year or two ago, that was great, and he's got another movie coming out this year, something about like Jack Goes Home or something like that.
I thought there were only two. I didn't know there was another one.
No, there is the youngest Culkin, who I feel bad that I can't recall his name right now, but yeah, he's been doing some really good work as well recently. Because I think because Kieran was in Igby Goes Down, and I think the youngest Culkin played like the younger version of Igby in that film.
Oh, interesting. Well, it's funny because you have a member of the Culkin clan, and you have a member of the Arquette clan. Like, we have two
powerful families.
Two people from two powerful families in this, and it's obvious why Van Damme would do this. Joe Esterhazy. I mean, this guy was coming off Basic Instinct at this time,
yeah.
And I remember reading, just preparing for this podcast. I watched the movie. I watched the movie a couple times, and because we agreed to do this like a couple months ago, and so when you said, "Okay, we're about ready to record if you want to do it," I said, "Okay, so let me watch it like a couple times." So I watched it a couple times, but I like to, after I'm done watching it, read a couple reviews, and I read Roger Ebert's review for this, and he was not too kind, but he said that this must be the script that was gathering dust in Joe Esterhazy's desk. And
yes, that was a good line.
Yeah, you read it too.
Yeah. No, I totally did, and yeah, I tend to do that. Like whenever I do a film for this podcast, I always read the Ebert review because it's always kind of smarmy, but there's usually a good line or two in it.
Absolutely. I do the same. In fact, you and I we speak in a movie group a lot, and we both mentioned how much we loved Ebert. You know, that he kind of influenced us growing up. So I do the same thing. Like I do it for my podcast too. I'm doing the Nightmare on Elm Street series on my podcast now, and like I always read a review of his about it, just to get another perspective of it before I do my own. You know.
Oh yeah, and I tend to do that too because I mean, even though he could enjoy like a B movie, could enjoy kind of the lower budget stuff, like, you know, he's a bit more highbrow than I usually am, because like he despised Freddy Got Fingered, and I love Freddy Got Fingered. That's kind of where I fall with Ebert.
Me and my girlfriend were talking about that review the other day where he just said, "It's not the bottom of the barrel, it doesn't even scrape the bottom of the barrel, it's that gooey stuff on the underneath of the barrel." Like,
this movie doesn't deserve to be mentioned in the same sentence as barrels, I think he said.
Yes. I think Van Damme was kind of in that same boat with him. Like, I don't think he was really too kind to many of his films. And
I don't think he was very kind to like any action stars, really, like any of the big action stars, except, I mean, maybe he was okay with Schwarzenegger every once in a while, or Stallone, but I think he was always kind of the same towards Seagal as well.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely was. Even he didn't even give Die Hard that great of a review either. So obviously, like at that point, his mind wasn't set on action, and unless you were an art house prominent Oscar contender, I don't think he probably paid attention to you too much because he was, like you said, a little highbrow. But that's what made his reviews interesting, and why when he did like an action film, you're like, oh, he actually likes this movie. That's interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely one you got to put on your list right away.
Absolutely, yeah.
But that's the thing, and a lot of people there seemed to be a bit of Ebert backlash. Like a lot of people are like, oh, he wasn't that good or whatever. But again, it all comes down like it's a single guy and it's his perspective on movies. Like you're not going to agree with it all the time with any reviewer. Like even if you find one that matches sensibilities, like that's the thing. You get a writer's voice and then it's them talking about films. That's what brings you to them, not like just reading people that agree with what you think of movies.
Positively. And we had mentioned Esterhaus, who was prominent before the making of this movie, and let's mention another one who just a couple years before made a big name for himself, Mr. Ted Levine. He has a really interesting role in this. He's not in it that much, but
he has like the role of like the main goon,
yes.
Like the bad guy's number two man.
Yeah, and you hear that voice, you know exactly who it is. I mean that I think he was typecast since Silence of the Lambs as being that creepy guy just around the corner. I liked him in this though. I liked his threats towards Van Damme. He wasn't a real threat, but he was confident in his stance and definitely made Van Damme think a bit before the final few fights of the movie.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, that's always kind of a good role to have because a lot of times the main villain, like he kind of chews the scenery a bit, but being that like kind of threatening side man, like that's a good role to play around with. And he does excellent in this. But something I did kind of notice though, like their scenes together are really good. And I like the way they kind of feed off each other's energy and kind of like try to out masculine each other.
Yes.
But there are times where they seem to have more chemistry than he has with Arquette. So like... There are times, because like they do pretty okay, like him and Rosanna Arquette, especially if she didn't really like him, but they seemed really into each other. Like they had much more chemistry. Jesus. Because that's kind of always a bit of a trope in at least the early Van Damme films as well, is like whether it's his, sidekick best buddy character or even the bad guy, like there's always kind of an odd sexual tension between them. Like there's usually kind of like homoerotic undertones or overtones in the films at times. And it kind of plays that way a little bit because it's always like there's the bad guy that wants to kill Van Damme or whatever action star it is, but god damn it, does he respect him? And it's a challenge and he's into it. It gets him off that he gets a challenge to fight this guy.
Wow, I didn't look at it like that, but now I have to watch it a third time in a month to notice that. Wow, that's an interesting perspective. What do you feel, Marcus? I got to ask, what do you feel? Not just in this movie, but like the drifter who wanders in and saves like the family. Like, I mean, we've seen that trope a lot, but how do you think this movie actually handles it?
Pretty well. I mean, about as well as you can. Because, I mean, especially at that point, maybe we hadn't seen it quite as much, but it is very much a cliche at this point. But I think it really all comes down to the actors, and you have such a good cast here that it works. Because there's nothing spectacular about the writing. There's nothing really, like, that blows you away or that you haven't seen before with this kind of trope. But I don't know, like I think the fact that they actually made the mother a decent character who kind of like, has her own thing going on. She has a thing with the sheriff, but then this new stranger guy comes along and he's good with the kids and stuff. And again, she stands up for herself. She's kind of a strong character and not just the damsel in distress or the love interest. And again, the fact that the kid actors don't suck as they tend to do in most movies is a big thing, because that's the thing, especially when you have big, bulky action stars and they have to like endear themselves to children to endear themselves to the audience. Like, it doesn't work a lot of times. Like, half the time you get Arnold Schwarzenegger in Kindergarten Cop, or more recently, Dolph Lundgren in Kindergarten Cop 2. And it just doesn't work very well. But this actually, like, you get it. You get that Kieran Culkin has the daddy issues and wants a father figure, and then Van Damme is exactly what he wants. And you can see why Van Damme is liking these kids, because, I mean, he wants to bone their mom, but they're also just nice kids.
Yeah. Don't ever mention Kindergarten Cop 2 again.
I wrote a review of that for the site. I actually didn't hate it.
Really?
I didn't hate it. I think it's just that I like Dolph Lundgren. the movie is pretty terrible and does every cliche thing you could think, but I don't know, man. It didn't work a lot for me, but it worked enough for me to where I didn't hate it. It was about 20 minutes too long, but other than that, it was okay.
Wow, that's interesting. Interesting. As far as Nowhere to Run goes, it's we did have those tropes, and we also had, like I mentioned, for somebody who didn't want to do this film, I think her and Van Damme have a decent amount of chemistry. But I think it kind of shows that she kind of didn't want to be there.
Yeah, a little bit, but she made do with what she had because again, the script wasn't giving her a lot to do. The direction is pretty good. Like it's a good, solid action film, but as far as even the drama elements and the family elements, like they're not done that well. Like they're just
No.
kind of serviceable to the plot to get to all the gunfights and the shoot 'em ups and the chases and the fight scenes and stuff. But I mean, yeah, she makes do with it. I mean, I can't really think of an example of a movie like this being done that much better because I think there's kind of like a breaking point. Like it can only go so high with this kind of story, I think.
Was this before or after Hard Target?
Same year, actually. Hard Target
same
was
year.
also 93.
Okay. All right. I was curious about that because that's when he went back to the action genre. I kind of wish at this point he had done more stuff like this. Like this was a movie that, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, like it gripped me and when I was younger, and it was just something different. And I think if Van Damme had actually tried more of this, he wouldn't have to be doing a comeback. He would have continued being a star.
Well, partially, but I think, and I've kind of discussed this a little on the podcast before, I think it's more just that the face of action movies changed going into the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, it kind of went from, the Stallone, Schwarzenegger, Van Damme, Seagal action thing, like Lone Man, kind of same story over and over again. The fighting styles, everything like that. That kind of changed into more, up close and personal, shaky cam fights, like your Bourne Identities or The Matrix and stuff like that. Like, I think just kind of the face of action movies changed. So those guys kept doing the same kinds of movies. Those just went direct to video. And it's only when like they really did branch out and start doing different kinds of movies. That's why like, around the late 90s, early 2000s, Schwarzenegger was doing like horror and sci-fi movies, and Stallone was doing whatever the fuck he was doing at that time. Doing fucking Driven and shit like that.
Jesus Christ.
But no, and that's why Van Damme went direct to video and started making kind of weirder, different movies from time to time. Stuff like Replicant and stuff like that is actually a really good movie, but it's not going to be like a theatrically released one. But yeah, like I don't know. He tried to do a little bit of different stuff as it went on. He got into kind of like the schlocky comedy action stuff towards the late 90s, which I think hurt him quite a bit. But like, he was, like I said, next year doing a video game movie and a science fiction movie and stuff like that. Like he's branching out a little bit, but again, he had to make those Van Damme action films, and they're just like soon the demand just kind of wasn't there, but the supply kept coming.
What's your you mentioned earlier that this had a lot of the cliche action movie lines. What's your favorite line? I gotta know.
Favorite line out of this? There's about 4 or 5 really good ones.
There are.
I'm trying to think, because as far as just action movie one-liners, even though it's kind of silly, just the "I'm the parking lot attendant and you're bothering my customers" is a really good one. Because just out of nowhere, and just like, why would he say that? But also, again, just like his kind of final one-liner when he's against Ted Levine, and he's just like, "Au revoir, fucker."
Yeah,
like, it's simple, it's good, it's strong.
Yeah.
And it's also a callback to what he said before.
Absolutely, yeah.
But just the parking lot attendant one, that one just
that's the one that
came
sticks
out
out.
of nowhere. Yeah, that one made me laugh the hardest because I was just baffled by it.
Yeah.
But then there's also like saying he's hunting pink flamingos. Like,
that was weird. That was definitely weird. What about like when he's like over by the water and the kid comes over to him at the water, and it was just like it seems very coincidental, but that's movie making 101, isn't it? Like this is how this guy gets involved in their lives.
Yeah.
Well,
it's also weird. I guess we can kind of jump somewhat into the plot now. So basically, Van Damme plays what's his name, Sam.
Yes.
And Sam is a bank robber who is in jail. And while he is getting transferred, and he's in jail not because of robbing a bank, but because he's in jail for murdering a security guard. So while he's being transferred somewhere, his old partner breaks him out because it was the partner that actually killed the guy, and Van Damme just took the rap for him. So the whole opening scene is actually pretty awesome. For some reason, everything in this movie is smoky as fuck all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there's a lot of good like stuntmen and character actors that are prisoners on the bus. Like a couple of different, like Sven Thorson is there. Just doesn't get any lines. Most of them don't. But yeah, so he ends up getting the bus flipped. We have a bus flip in less than 4 minutes. In this movie.
You know what put me in mind of? It put me in mind of like Another 48 Hours. You know, when that bus flipped, I kind of thought the same thing as I was watching this.
Yeah, so it's a good breakout scene.
Yeah.
So they get out, they let all the prisoners go. The prisoners try to steal their car, and it's the first kind of fight scene. But then as soon as they're driving away, we don't even get to really meet his partner or anything, and he gets shot in the fucking neck.
That great Joe Esterhaus setup. It always comes to play, doesn't it?
And it's so good because, he's saying like, oh, it should have been me in jail. And then he's like, do you forgive me? He's like, yeah, I forgive you, man. And he's like, good. I couldn't have that bother me for the rest of my life. Dies.
They have to set Van Damme up at this point, though, as being someone who's in prison but sympathetic.
Yeah, because he didn't actually kill a guy. He was a bank robber, but you do what you got to do. But he didn't kill the guy. He was the good guy that took the fall for the younger guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is how you do that. And, it's a fine line. If you're going to have a prisoner hang out with a family and a single mother, and the single mother's going to fall in love with them, you can't have him be this guy who did something terrible and is not sorry for it. You have to make him into a sympathetic, I didn't mean to kind of guy. And I think they do a decent job of doing that in that setup here. I think, you see him on in the bus and you're thinking, okay, well, he must have done something terrible. But when you eventually hear about it, it's like, okay, I don't know if I would trust him with my kid, but it's an interesting way to set him up as somebody who we want to see get with his family.
Well, also, and I think it works because, like I said, they have all these stuntmen and kind of character actors, these big, bulky guys on the bus with him, and he's kind of the smallest out of the group. He's the one that seems most out of place, like he doesn't really belong there, and I think that's kind of a visual trick they do to kind of make you feel for him right off the bat. Yeah, and I guess we can get into this because one of the tropes in Van Damme films are kind of either a silly reason or just not acknowledging his nationality at all. Because sometimes, sometimes it's the Schwarzenegger thing of like, oh, his name's like John Turner, but you don't get any explanation of like why he has the accent. And here it's a quick, easy fix. He's like, oh, he's from Quebec. The end. But they don't say anything about like why he knows how to fight either.
Yeah, that was weird. But at the same time, a lot of times I don't like hearing where people learn to fight. Like, I don't like hearing about where my stars learn to fight. It's kind of what made me gravitate towards Seagal films, too. I mean, Seagal is a cop in the majority of those films. How did he know how to fight? With the exception of Above the Law, we don't really hear where he learned the majority of the things.
It's like, why does he know Aikido?
Exactly. Like, why does he know this? So, I that's what I kind of like about these things. Like, this is a guy who we learn about it as he does it. It's not like we're set up for it. And that I enjoyed.
And I guess for the most part, like, his fighting isn't so choreographed or like so kind of so much of the martial arts to where it seems out of place. He does more kind of brawl than anything else. He throws a few kicks, but one thing that doesn't show up in this movie at all is like splits and spin kicks.
Yes.
Which more and more, like, some of the films I've done so far, like, don't have any of those, and that's kind of his big thing. He's known for the splits. But yeah, and I think that helps, because most of the movies where he does that, he's a fighter in the movie. So it makes sense that he has that fighting style, that it's, more stylized and stuff. But here, minus a few good moves that he has, he's mostly just throwing dudes around and kicking them and punching them in the face.
And I think that was intentional. I honestly do.
Yeah.
I think they didn't want it to be flashy. I think they wanted it to be gritty, and they wanted it to be, they want it to feel quote unquote real. If you have somebody in the midst of a fight doing the splits, it doesn't look too real. I think he was known for the splits mostly because I used to watch the Arsenio Hall show and all those talk shows he used to do back in the day, and and he would do the splits on those shows all the time. I think that's why he became known for them.
Oh yeah, well, and he did them a lot in his earlier movies, but those again made sense because he was, a fighter. He was a martial artist in those. But yeah, he would show him off every chance he got.
Absolutely, yeah.
And actually, the last episode of this I did was for sudden death, and I was like, you could have tossed one in, like you could have stopped a goal on the ice by doing a split or something. Like, there are ways to subtly get one in there if you have to.
That would have been amazing.
Yeah. So anyway, so he kind of he buries his buddy, his partner, and he sets up van camp, I guess. But he's out in the woods, and I guess he hears music or something, and he kind of gets drawn to Rosanna Arquette's farm, which she has this huge chunk of land and like a nice farm and everything. Yeah, again, everything is so fucking smoky. I don't understand why. But also, we get nudity in the first 12 minutes, and he's a fucking peeping Tom.
I know.
To quote my good friend Marty McFly, he's a peeping Tom.
he's like Superman in Superman Returns in this. I mean, he's just gazing in that window, and just he doesn't seem to have any qualms about it either. Yeah.
Well, I guess at this point we don't know exactly how bad of a guy he is, because I was definitely getting some rapey vibes there. Like when he goes into the house after that and he has his gun pulled, I was like, is he gonna rape her?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh no, he steals the salt.
Yeah, he needs salt. And it was funny because that was the point of time when my girlfriend had actually walked in. She had walked in when that scene was going on. And she looked at it and she sees him go into this house, look around in the dark, grab some salt, walk out, and she's like, what the hell is he doing? What is the context of this? I said, don't even worry about it. Just don't even worry about it.
Just let it wash over you.
Yeah, just let it wash over you. And she just walked back and she went to go watch her Gilmore Girls DVDs or something. I don't know, but it was
yeah. So you can't judge.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, well, I guess that is kind of taken out of context if you don't really see it. But yeah, grabs a
salt. To be honest, it's not that much better in context because I was really kind of worried because I wasn't sure exactly what kind of movie this is going to be yet.
Yeah, it's like, boy, what the hell kind of movie did this guy choose? Do I want to even be affiliated with this guy?
So anyway, we also meet Kieran Culkin, who plays Mookie in this.
Yeah.
Go for it, Mookie. But also, I wasn't quite sure about this because it's not explained a lot, but he thinks Van Damme is E.T., right?
I'm surprised you didn't throw a baseball at him.
Yeah. Well, he did. He throws the red ball down the stairs.
Oh, that's right. He does.
A little bit later, but it's kind of throwaway, and I wasn't sure I heard it right, but I think he says it a second time, and he refers to him as E.T. because he hears somebody in the house and then sees someone run away with a light, so he thinks he's a little pudgy alien coming to visit him.
Oh, that Van Damme typecasting, I'm telling you.
Well, you know the story, right? He was originally cast as the alien in E.T., but then they decided to go a different direction. He did costume tests and screen tests.
Oh, no, that was Predator. I thought that was Predator.
Same movie.
Same movie.
That was a joke. Pretty much any movie with an alien, he was cast originally and then cut out at the same.
Gotcha.
Because originally, they went with Kevin Peter Hall for E.T., and it worked out much better for everyone.
Fantastic. Yeah, I like that he has this. I like that he takes the salt and he goes to on the steak. And where did he get this scrumptious looking piece of meat here?
Well, because all he did was stop at a rest stop, a little convenience store. I doubt they're serving slices of beef, man.
Yeah, I know. And that steak looked delicious that he was cooking, whatever it was.
But yeah, and then he actually breaks back into the house just to return the salt. That's how good of a guy he is. He'll take a peep, but he won't force himself on there.
And he won't steal your salt. He'll just borrow it.
It's ridiculous. So eventually, I guess after the salt comes back, Kieran Culkin follows him out to his camp, and they have this little back and forth that again is pretty weird. There's a lot of weird adult-child stuff going on, and I guess it's kind of the early '90s. Maybe we weren't quite as paranoid about adults with our children, because this is still around the time when everyone was like, "Yeah, sure, go hang out with Michael Jackson at his big mansion by yourself. It's cool. Yeah, get to hang out with a celebrity." So the kid goes, and Van Damme's sitting there reading a nudie bag like he does, and he comes in and asks if he's a bad guy. He puts the gun down on the nudie magazine, and the kid's like, "Do you like boobs?" And Van Damme's like, "Sometimes." And he's just like, "I think they're totally gross."
Yeah, and Van Damme, the actor, is thinking, "Man, you just have a long way to go, kid. Wait till you get to be 15.
Yeah.
You're right. There are some real creepy vibes going on here, but like you said, the early '90s, we weren't really too worried about that. That's something that would probably be scrutinized in this day and age. But back then, it was like that was kind of like a kid's dream was to have like this friend come and you actually meet him and you actually connect with them, and nothing creepy about it. If you're just trying to the guy's looking for a father, and I think that comes throughout the course of the film too.
It definitely does, but from an outside perspective, from anyone else, it just doesn't look right.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I guess that leads into like kind of one of the next scenes is that when Kieran Culkin comes back and his little sister comes back as he's bathing in the lake, which again, another Van Damme trope. We do get some nudity and plenty of shirtlessness in this movie, but we get a bun shot.
Yes.
When he comes up out of the lake, we get to see those buns glistening in the sun. But while he's doing that, he's walking out of the lake to go get his clothes, and then the little girl comes up and totally sees his dick. And granted, he does back away back into the river. At least he did that, but he was totally cool with the little boy seeing his dick. Like, he was still exposing himself to children that are not his.
You're right. At this point, it's getting creepy.
Yeah, a little bit. Well, because that leads into a dinner talk a little later on. That, again, even if it is the 90s, like, it is baffling.
Yeah, but that's that Esterhaus writing, though. I mean, he has that element of sleaze in it, and there might have been something weird going on with that pen at this point, but and I think it might have been streamlined in later drafts, but. Yeah, I'll agree with you. It's a creepy thing, and the Van Dick is out, and nobody's
very nice.
Yeah, thank you. No, he's not. He has no qualms about showing the boy, but the girl. Oh no, I'm back in the water now.
Yeah, which I guess I kind of see the reason. Like, well, it's a boy. He has one. I'm sure he's seen his dad's, but again, it's a stranger. It is a small child and a stranger. Like, you don't need to expose yourself. I mean, he's naked in the lake. He needs to get his clothes, whatever. At least he covered himself up and hid himself away from the girl, but she totally got an eyeful because next after basically the plot is that these land developers led by Joss Ackland are trying to buy up / forcefully take Rosanna Arquette's farmland to build something that they're building, some community something or other. I don't even know what it is.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a strip mall or something, isn't it?
Yeah, a strip mall or something that's supposed to revitalize the town.
Mm-hmm.
So he sends some goons to go intimidate her into signing, and they kill one of her cows for some reason. I don't know why. They just come home and there's a dead cow. Then they start beating up on her truck with like planks of wood and stuff. And Sam shows up and saves the day. This is where the "I'm the parking attendant and you're bothering my customers" line comes in. So he kind of saves the day. They invite him in and stuff. And I guess it's maybe, the next day, because he kind of stays in the barn and stuff. And he's taking a shower while they're out of town or like into the town to get stuff. And Rosanna Arquette's sheriff boyfriend, Lonnie, comes in and just like opens the shower and is pointing a gun at him and totally snuck a peek. I saw his eyes dart down.
Well, you say it's her boyfriend. I never got the feeling. Was it her ex-boyfriend? Was it her new boyfriend? Was it somebody who, is this Brad from Superman 3 where he lost her in this small town and thinks that he's like he's God's gift to women, so he needs her back? Like, I never knew exactly what was going on between these two. All I know that he had a thing for her.
I feel like it's not a real relationship. Like, I don't think he's eating dinner with the kids or anything. It seems like he's a late night fuck buddy.
Gotcha.
Because he does come up to the house one time as he's leaving and she's all like in a robe and stuff. And he's like, that was fun. And then he just leaves. So I kind of feel like that's what their relationship is. He makes late night booty calls, but that's about all she has going on with him and all he has going on with her.
Fair enough.
Like, he's infatuated with her, but he doesn't want to like take care of those fucking kids or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the uncle who loves his nieces and nephews, but only likes to play with the kids and then go home and not deal with any of the stress that comes with having kids.
The fun uncle.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that's kind of the way this guy is with her. It's like, I want to have the fun of being able to fuck you, but your kids can take a back seat.
Yeah, sorry, I'm real busy being the sheriff in this totally small town.
of like 20 people.
I'm sure I have some kind of paperwork I need to fill out. There's probably a kitten in a tree somewhere. I got too much on my plate, babe.
A kitten in a tree. Fantastic.
So yeah, like I said, he catches them in the shower, and Rosanna Arquette comes back, and she totally gets an eyeful too, and that's what seals the deal. I can see she looks down, she's like, "Oh, seals the deal. They are gonna bone eventually." So I guess let's jump to the dinner table scene when he's eating dinner with them. They're just eating, like no real conversation going on, and the little girl Bree out of nowhere is just like, "He's got a big penis," and her response is to laugh. Like to laugh and just like, "Oh, you're so precocious." Not like, "Why the fuck do you know that? Why the fuck does she know that?"
Yeah, doing her motherly duties of not inquiring about why she knows about this strange man's penis. Yeah, I agree. Because
again, doesn't know him, like maybe is attracted to him, but random drifter guy that comes and like saves him from bad guys. Her kids already know him, but she had heard nothing about him. And then the little girl knows what his dick looks like.
Yeah. That's cause for a restraining order in my book, but she pays no mind to it. She just laughs it off.
She laughs it off and says, "He has an average sized penis." And it cuts to Van Damme, and he looks so hurt. He kind of like looks down at himself a little bit, but he just looked like he just got the biggest of hurt feelings.
Yeah, it's the most hurt he gets in this entire film, and that's a little bit of a beef I have with it. Is he's never really in any danger in this film.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's the one who's saving this family. But yeah, this is the most hurt he gets this entire film. It's emotional hurt.
Yeah, when she kind of jokingly calls it average. Because, like, come on, Van Damme. We've seen your movies before. You're not going to let that go. You don't have an average penis. But yeah, she's just like, "I don't want to hear any more about penises." But she even says, like, it's average, and the little kid's like, "You've seen it already?" Just like, these kids talk way too bluntly to their mom about her sex life. Because Kieran Culkin is like trying to get her to fuck Van Damme the whole movie.
Absolutely, yeah. He's setting them up crazy, isn't he?
Yeah, he really wants a new dad, but he's just like, "Come on, fuck him. That'll make him stay, Mom."
And by the way, don't you love the way I brought up earlier in the podcast? Like, yeah, there are these subtle references of him wanting a dad. No. It's right in your fucking face, because this kid is wanting a dad and wanting a dad now.
Oh yeah, that's kind of his whole arc. Is like he goes out to the barn and looks at his dad's memorabilia, and he's all sad, and he has to lie to his sister about, "I remember Dad, and I remember doing this stuff with him," and he's like, "I don't really remember my dad that much. I was too young." Yeah,
and the other dad, there's a real tender moment in the scene. I'm going to jump to it if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Of Rosanna Arquette watching home movies, and Van Damme just kind of standing there, just kind of watching, and it's kind of a tender moment because I think I've lost my dad, and it's just like I'm watching this, and I almost got a tear, like just thinking, wow, like this guy kind of walked in a situation, and he's kind of having to replace this guy and protect her, and I feel like maybe he feels a connection to this guy to protect her for him. It's an interesting little dynamic that I wasn't expecting it when I rewatched it for this podcast.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a mix of a couple of things. I feel like it's one, Van Damme's the good guy. Like, he's got to do the right thing. He sees bad guys. He can do something about it. He's the only one. He's the right guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mm-hmm. But also, it is just like he makes that initial connection with the kids, and he's like, "Oh, these kids are cool." Like, I've been in prison for a while, a couple of years or something. It's been a while since I've been around people or had any kind of family. He mentions that he used to be married a long time ago. So maybe he's kind of searching for that as well. But yeah, it's kind of a mix of all those things, but they play it pretty well. It's not as hammy and forced as it usually is in these kind of stories.
But Sylvie, it's not really in your face per se, but it
comes close with the little boy and his daddy issues, but
yeah.
That's about it.
That's about exactly. And and not to mention, like you mentioned, the boy walked in with him with a nudie magazine, so we know the guy's looking to, I don't know, use the human missile, so to speak. He's got his own. He's not just this guy coming in and like, "Oh, I'm not going to think about banging your mom. I have my own issues to go sort through." He's kind of a conflicted character, And
well, he's also, again, he's been in jail. Like
that's true.
And within 12 minutes of the movie, he sees a hot naked lady, and he's like, "Yeah,
Very
I'll
true.
totally hang out with you kids. Yeah, introduce me to your mom."
Very true. And I guess after being in prison for as long as he was, I guess Roseanne Arquette at this point looks like Charlize Theron, and it's time. It's time to.
Hey, she's no chopped liver, man.
That's true. That's true.
And again, like I like she has a very kind of like cute face and stuff like that, but I was surprised like how kind of banging her body is in this.
Yeah,
not me to be so kind of blunt or gross about it, but like she is a very attractive woman.
She's very, very attractive in this. Yeah, in fact, that's probably the most attractive I've seen her. She's definitely an attractive single mom, and that was the thing I was up against. It's like, well, Mr. Van Damme, do you really want to plow through this field after you have these two kids here, and yeah, so much for not being blunt, right, Marcus? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
about that.
well, I will say she took very good care of herself, because those are not the abs of a woman that has had 2 children in the past couple of years.
Absolutely, yeah.
But no, I mean, and again, it's sweet for the most part. When it actually gets to the sex scene, it's a little gross, because Van Damme is doing a lot of titty sucking in that scene.
Yes.
Like he is, you can tell he's a man that's been in prison. He's just like, oh my god, I forgot what boobs are like, and he's just like all about them.
Yeah. Well, like you said, he's been in prison, so I mean, this is the first set of boobs that wasn't between the pages of a magazine. So
I will say though, the kind of the morning after their sex scene, when they're kind of lying in bed together and he's kind of awake and he looks down at her and stuff, I'm so surprised that it didn't have some kind of line or like mutter under his breath, and it's just like, average, huh? Like something. I'm surprised he didn't bring that back at all in any kind of way.
my guess is that was probably in the draft of Esterhoff's script, and
Yeah.
and people came in and said, "Nah, we got to do away with this, dude. We're not going to call attention to it."
Yeah, come on. It was a cute moment between the kids at the dinner table. Like we don't need to have him be that like vindictive about being called
exactly.
average.
Exactly. Like all of a sudden he's got a vendetta against this girl. No. We're not going to bring that back.
Which you kind of mentioned another trope is a personal vendetta against the bad guy, which is a trope in Van Damme films, whether it's like, killed his brother, did something to his family, yada, yada, yada. He kind of doesn't have a personal vendetta against the bad guy. Like, he doesn't even really know him or meet him until the very end of the movie. It's just kind of, he gets wrapped up in this woman's story. So he's there for her or whatever as he's making a connection to them. But he has no personal vendetta. He has no personal stakes in it other than he just kind of gets caught up in this story.
Yeah, he gets that. That's a good way of putting it. It's not like he has a history with these villains. He's the only reason these villains are out to get him is because the sheriff is either the boyfriend or a past boyfriend of Miss Arquette. As we pointed out earlier, we don't know. And B, like, he's just in the way of these guys accomplishing their mission of getting this girl out of the house. And so, yeah, there's no personal vendetta, but it's a thing of protection. I think that's what we're going for here.
Yeah, it becomes personal by the end.
Absolutely.
Because he has this whole like crisis of faith, and he leaves and comes back and stuff like that. So that's kind of where it gets personal for him. But again, even when he comes back, he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that like the bad guys are in the house and threatening her and stuff and going to kill her. He just happens to show up when that happens. So again, and that's when he meets the actual bad guys in the final like 5 minutes of the movie.
Yeah. Do you I'll get your feeling on this because you didn't really watch this movie until this podcast. Did you feel at any point it kind of dragged, or were you kind of sucked into the human drama that was established here?
I was sucked in more than not. Like most action films and like even most Van Damme films, it slogs a little in the middle. Mm-hmm. But like the opening is really strong. I like the beginning of the connections with the kids and stuff, and the final couple of action scenes. Like they do it pretty well by peppering in an action scene just about the time when you're starting to look at your watch. So it does pretty well, but there are a couple moments where it slogs a little bit, and I did write several times in my notes just like, oh, they're gonna bone now, right? No, they're not. No? Okay. So 10 minutes later, like, okay, so now they're definitely gonna bone. No? Still no? Oh, okay. And I just like kept being like, just fucking get it over with already.
Because I mean, this movie for a human drama, and most dramas are between an hour and 40, hour 50 minutes. This movie ends right at the hour and 30-minute mark.
Yeah, it's a tight movie.
Tight
Like I said,
movie, yeah.
I can't really call too much that needs to be cut out of it, but there were just a few moments where I was just kind of like, all right, it's about time for an action scene or, sex scene, something. Give me something.
Yeah, and I think that was something that came up later on. Again, when you sign Van Damme, you make a movie with more action than not. And but I think the balance is fine. I think once Ted Levine comes into the fold, and once we establish who these guys are, you're right that the action scenes come at a more rapid pace.
Well, not only that, but I think instead of just kind of constant action throughout, they just have a couple of really good, bigger action set pieces. Because you have like the bus flip in the beginning, which is a good scene. Then you have that kind of initial him meeting the bad guys, quick fight scene. But then the next action scene that happens is a huge one, and it's great, and it's really kind of gripping because they find out that like after the meeting where some other guy spoke up to them, they set his barn on fire. So in the middle of the night, Van Damme gets up and he runs over there and he kind of helps the guy to get his horses out of his barn. He saves the guy because he gets pummeled by like some falling stuff. And then, oh no, everything's catching fire and the propane tanks are gonna blow.
Yes.
So he takes a fucking tractor and he knocks down a water tower to put out the fire enough to stop it. It's really intense. It's a really good scene.
Yes. The fire in this movie is it's really prominently displayed. There are some slow motion action scenes within this fire, and
oh yeah, they're peppered all through. I didn't make as many notes about the slow mo, but that's a big Van Damme trope, or like slow mo action scenes, screaming, slow motion, jumping away from things exploding in slow motion.
Positively, yeah. They're definitely tropes, and they're there. But I think mixed amongst this human drama, sappy or not, you're rooting for him to defeat these guys, and that's something that we're not just dealing with thugs here. We have, like I mentioned earlier, the bad guy from Lethal Weapon 2 here. Forgive me, I don't know the actor's name, but he's here to just establish that, look, we're here to take you off the land, and we are going to get you off the land whether you like it or not. And Van Damme's the one who's saying, no, you're not going to do that. You can't do that through straight action. You have to pepper in the drama. And I think as a kid, I think that's what I kind of liked. Like, I was more Kieran Culkin's age than anything when this movie came out. So I was wanting this kid to have a father as well. But
yeah, I was just a touch younger than that because let's see, it was 93. So yeah, I would have been about 6 or 7 years old. But yeah, I kind of feel that I was kind of the opposite. Like my mom died when I was kind of young, so I could see. But that's also something that's kind of interesting. You never really see the gender swapped version of that, the flip version of that, where like, it's a single father raising kids and then like a woman comes in. You get it sometimes with like silly shit like my stepmother is an alien. But
what a reference. Dude, what a reference. I don't think I've ever referenced that on my podcast. That's a crazy reference.
That was the first thing that popped into my head when I thought of that. I was like, well, I guess there was that one. But yeah, you don't really get that unless it's more like a horror or silly comedy thing where it's just like, oh no, my new stepmom is crazy.
Mm-hmm. I'll tell you what another thing I really liked about this movie. If we're going to go to the finale, is that okay? Or can we go to the finale?
Yeah, I mean, we're mostly there. We can kind of skip over everything else, like the cop trying to get him to leave. He eventually comes back. It's basic kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. In the finale of this film, I'll tell you what I really liked. When you have a kid in a film like this, the kid is there to push the protagonist into action, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's pretty much why he's there. Also, by the end of the film, he's doing something drastic to help the villain, like maybe, or to help the good guy. Like mm-hmm. he stabs the guy who's about ready to kill him, or the protagonist is in a desperate situation and the kid comes to knock the guy in the head or something like that. They don't do that here. The kid's mostly a witness to everything, and I enjoyed that.
Not too much. There's a little bit, because there's that one bad guy towards the end who just gets the shit beat out of him over and over again by everyone.
Yeah.
So he kind of has almost a little bit of like a Home Alone moment with that guy.
Almost.
Where he's kind of setting him up a little bit. He mm-hmm. gets a horse to kick him in the face, which I thought was kind of awesome.
That was great. Great.
But yeah, he is kind of standing on his own. But yeah, usually you have like the kid either has to help or possibly even kill a bad guy towards the end. So like he kind of grows up in that moment and he's just like, I don't want this. I thought it would be cool to do this, but no. But yeah, not really so much. He's still kind of dependent on Van Damme. It's just Van Damme comes back and is the hero he wanted him to be, is the father figure he wanted him to be. And it's kind of a touching moment.
Very touching moment. Very touching moment. And again, I enjoyed that the kid was that kind of kid. Like that these kids can be so annoying, especially in the early '90s, late '80s. Like, you know, you if they're always in the background like that, they're going to come into play. But he doesn't really do that, except for, like you said, a couple of times, but not in the finale, which I enjoyed. I enjoyed the finale of this movie a lot, actually.
Yeah, the finale is really good. And like I said, it's kind of the usual stuff. She finds out who he is. She gets mad, even though she really kind of doesn't have a right to. He's just, a bank robber, but she was suspicious of him from the beginning. He's like, oh, okay, so what's your deal? Where you're from? And he's just kind of vague. Like, she knew nothing about him. She shouldn't have been that surprised. Which I do want to ask one question, because when she asked him, like, what he did in Quebec, he was like, I was a lawyer. Which I thought was like, oh, okay, he's just saying whatever. But then there's that scene that you were talking about where he gives her advice on, like, how they can't kick her out of her house because he has to wait at least a month for this, and then this has to go through, and it'll be months. Like, was he actually a lawyer before he became a bank robber? Because he knew his law pretty down pat.
I get the feeling that he was.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a guy at this point. Let's put this into perspective. Van Damme is what, 35 at the time of this movie, or maybe not even that old, maybe 30. I get the feeling that they wanted to establish him as somebody who led a huge life before all of this stuff went on, and but if you make him a lawyer, like, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of what made him an action star to begin with?
Yeah.
But you know what? Put a little wrinkle in there. I like that, and you know what it reeks of, Marcus. I want to say this. I want to say this right now. It reeks of a script that didn't have Van Damme in mind when it was written. If you're going to do this, you want somebody like, I don't know if Bruce Willis comes off as a lawyer either, but give us somebody.
Kurt Russell, maybe. Kurt Russell could have done
Kurt Russell would have been perfect. You know what? That's a great point. And if you're going to do that in this script, you have to make him something else. You have to change the story around, because Van Damme, I enjoy Van Damme. Obviously you do, or else you wouldn't have a podcast named after him. But Van Damme doesn't come off as somebody who is one of our scholars.
Not really, no.
Yeah, I don't see him studying for a bar exam anytime soon. And so, like...
Yeah, you never really want to see him as, like, a scientist either.
Absolutely.
Really.
Yeah, if you're going to do that, you put... it's the whole story of Denise Richards as Christmas Jones in World Is Not Enough. Like, there are some things you just don't do, and I don't think you do that with Van Damme. And I think the backstory here is way jumbled, because this was a script intended for some other kind of actor.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and yeah, they kind of peppered in, but I guess at the end of the day, I kind of like the fact that they don't go too much into his backstory. Like, we kind of know, okay, he robbed a bank and had to go to jail because of this. Oh, he was married at one point, and maybe he was a lawyer, but I'm glad he doesn't have, like, this big emotional scene where he has to, like, talk about what happened to him, why he went down that path, shit like that. Like, they just kind of leave it kind of vague. Like, oh, he's kind of a bad guy, but he's really a good guy at heart, and that's all we need to know.
Positively. Absolutely. Yeah, leave it at that. I don't know. Like, if you're gonna have these guys come in and take this house, I guess you do have to have somebody who knows the laws, but have it be a combined character. Don't make it into the Van Damme character.
Yeah. Oh, and I do want to mention one more one-liner. We kind of passed over it, but there's a point where the goons are like dumping chemicals on the farm ground or something, so I guess stuff won't grow or something. And he ends up having that big fight atop a bunch of tractors and shit. And he just has this one good line that kind of ends the scene where he knocks a dude out and he's like, strike 3, you're out. Gold. That is pure gold.
It's not exactly don't mind my friend, he's dead, tired type line, but it's in between,
Yeah.
Well,
also it's just like it's nothing, like it references nothing that's come before in the film. We know nothing about him being a fan of baseball or anything like that. It's almost a little bit like when he did Double Team with Rodman, and Rodman kept making basketball puns, though his character had nothing to do with basketball.
Yeah, yeah. That was a thing of the '90s, especially the late '90s. Was you combine them with with somebody of a different race and a different background. And here,
Well, Seagal did it with what?
DMX. No, it wasn't.
Yeah, he did it with
It
DMX.
was
He also did it
DMX.
with Keenan Ivory Wayans as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like he did a lot of those.
Yeah, a lot of those combinations. Van Damme's here to save this family, and whoever's in his way, well, fuck it. I just did Rosanna Arquette, and she was amazing, and you guys are not going to get her off this farm. That's all we need to know.
Some of these one-liners make it pretty clear that this is also from the writer of Tango and Cash, because there are just many like silly one-liners in that movie as well.
Positively, yeah, and the one-liners they are definitely peppered in, but we don't have a Rambo was a pussy line. This,
yeah.
You know.
If they had their way about it.
Yeah. And by the way, Marcus, that makes our second Kurt Russell reference in this podcast.
Hey, it's, that maybe I'll do that one next.
That'd be awesome. But yeah, you don't put Van Damme as the lawyer. You put him as an outsider with a heart of gold.
Yeah, and he plays that very well because he's kind of rough and rugged enough to where you could see him kind of having a rough life or doing some maybe not so good and hero-y things. But at the end of the day, like he's charming. Like he has that kind of energy to him. You could tell, like, yeah, you're someone I don't want to fuck with, but you're not going to let the bad guys win. And I think he just has that quality in just about all of his films.
Positively, yeah.
So I guess we can kind of jump to the end of the movie where he does have his fight with Ted Levine, which I think is a really great fight.
Agreed.
There's also a really great like spinning camera move in that when he like flips him over. That was great.
Yeah, something we hadn't really seen in a Van Damme film up until this point.
Yeah, and I guess we did jump over like the cops chase him down at some point, so he's like riding off on a motorcycle, running away from the cops who are chasing him on horseback. Yeah. For some reason. And even there's like a horse flip, which I didn't really like because it seemed like that horse probably got hurt. There's also just like a cop on a dirt bike for no reason, just so they could have a jump fight.
Yeah, something we see in like Mission Impossible 2 later on, like these kinds of fights where it's like motorcycles and Van Damme did that a lot though, didn't he? I mean, I'm not as big of a Van Damme aficionado as you, but I'm going to guess that he did.
Yeah, there's a number of motorcycle things, but at least, like, same year was Hard Target. At least he's not, like, standing up on the motorcycle in this one.
True.
Although there are a few different shots of, like, a bunch of birds flying off into the air, and if those had been in slow motion, I was just like, what is this, a John Woo movie over here? Calm down, guys.
What I liked about it, though, was even amongst all these fights, we are seeing somebody who is not, quote-unquote, superhuman. We're not seeing somebody who... Yeah, he knows martial arts, and yeah, he will kick your ass, but he doesn't know any more than the guys who are trying to kill him. And it is the trope of, guys with brains, and their suit, they wear suits. They know more than this guy who's coming in from the outside, but they don't know that this guy was also a suit because he was a lawyer. So I like the way they kind of play with the tropes a little bit. It's different.
Yeah, and again, I think it helps that you don't know as much about his background, so you can just kind of go with whatever they decide to do.
Positively.
So he has that fight with Levine, and again, great fight. It kind of ends the way you think it would. He gets thrown into a cop car, and we see a shotgun as he's getting thrown in, so it's like, okay, he's going to come back with that shotgun. So when he finally kills him, Chekhov's cards have to show up. He's been doing this weird like card trick thing like 2 times in the movie. That has to pay off somehow.
Yep.
So when he finally dies, his cards fly everywhere, and everybody's happy. It's a good payoff.
Yeah.
So towards the end, I will say I was with this movie, but then at the very end, when like he's going away, he's going to turn himself into the cops, so he's got to leave the mom and the kids, and he's promising them he'll come back. It's that sad, sentimental, tacky kid thing that's also from Lionheart. So kind of towards the end, that brought me down a little bit on what I was thinking of the movie because it was just so silly and just so cliche. But then the movie ends.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, we see him going into this cop car. He's being led by the cops away, and the final shot is of him looking out the window and waving. It is that sentimentality, and you're right. You're right, Marcus. It didn't hit me until you mentioned it earlier in this podcast, but this is E.T. going away, right? I mean, that's exactly what this is.
Yeah, it's E.T. It's also the exact same end of his film Lionheart, where, like, he has to go away. Except in Lionheart, they play it to where, like, he's taken away, he has to hug the little girl and the mom and tell him he'll be back for them, but then they just let him go and he comes running back, and it's a big emotional moment that totally works and still makes me cry every time I watch it.
Don't you in some way kind of want that sequel though that says, okay, so how did he actually get back to these people? Like, I don't no. It's
Kind
definitely
of, but
cold.
like he's probably gonna do it because he saved this woman. He's probably gonna get a reduction on his sentence. He has the tape where I think the kid had confessed to killing the guy and he didn't do it, so maybe his sentence will get brought down anyway. But at that point, I don't really care. But I will say one of the last shots of the movie that I guess we'll get into ratings in a hot minute, but this brought it down a point for me when all this was happening. But then it jumped right back up to where I initially was because one of the last shots of the movie is that he hits Joss Ackland in the balls before he gets
Yeah.
put in the cop car. Like Joss Ackland's talking crap to him, he just hits him in the balls and then gets in the car and waves goodbye.
Yep. Yeah. That was weird, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, again, it ended on a ball shot to the bad guy. So that's kind of the most interaction he has with the bad guy. Because even the bad guy, he takes Rosanna Arquette out by gunpoint, and then the cops show up and save him. So the only actual interaction he has with the main bad guy is hitting him in the balls as the movie ends.
Hey, you know what? It is Esterhaus. He's gonna get to the balls eventually. You know.
He's got to get to them balls.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, everything else, like he didn't really get drunk or dance in this movie. Of course, it wasn't really any martial arts or anything. So we'll skip over any of the other kind of tropes that show up in Van Damme movies. So let's go to our final Van Damme ratings on a scale of 1 to 10, or as I usually say it, 10 will be like a blood sport, like one of those kind of perfect Van Damme movies, and 1 being something like Derailed, which is a piece of garbage. And I will say that on every episode of this podcast.
All right, scale of 1 to 10. This movie. So are we doing this as a movie? Are we doing it as a Van Damme movie? Like,
well, see, it's kind of odd because people have been asking that when I say it, and I think it's kind of as a Van Damme movie, but it's not like based on the tropes that, like how much is it like Bloodsport? It's just like how good is this movie that has Van Damme in it? How much good Van Damme stuff do you get in it? Like how charming is he? How many, good lines does he have? How many good fight scenes does he have? Like, does he carry the movie? Like, how well does he do on that? How good and entertaining is the movie as a whole?
I think he is helped by a pretty tremendous supporting cast.
Mm-hmm.
I think the movie, as we said earlier, I think it does kind of drag in the middle. But this is a movie that Van Damme is an outsider, and he is somebody who you want to get to this family. You want to save this family, and they did a pretty good job of outlining this family as somebody we want to be saved. We see a lot of bad guy action. We see a lot of good action scenes near the end. But this movie isn't about the action. This movie is about Van Damme being this family's savior. And on that scale, and that scale alone, this is an 8 out of 10 for me on the Van Damme scale. Fantastically done. And Rosanna Arquette helps it. Kieran Culkin is really good as a child in this film. I had a really good time with this.
Well, and I guess at this point, Kieran Culkin, I guess all he'd really done is played like the cousin that pees the bed in the Home Alone movies. Like, he hadn't really done much, had he?
No. And if you know anything about the Culkin family too, that dad was trying to get them into everything. So, So I think that plays into it as well. But that or not, he's still really good in this. And Ted Levine, I always like seeing him. And as you said, Rosanna Arquette is much more attractive than she normally is in these films. It's an 8 for me, Marcus. This is an easy 8. There's a reason why when you put the flyer out to say, if you were to come on my podcast, what Van Damme movie would you talk about? This is the one I would say. And I gotta be honest, I hadn't seen it in probably about 5 or 6 years, but rewatching it was a good experience. And if you're going to go for something different, for something other than like a blood sport or the thing that we know Van Damme for, this is a good change of pace for him. And I wish he would have done more roles like this, quite honestly.
I like that. I've been kind of fighting a little bit with my own rating, and I think I'm going to give it a good solid 7.
Okay.
Maybe not quite as high as you, but like I said, it got down to a 6 at one point for me just because all the tacky, sentimental kid stuff. But like I said, that ball hit at the end kind of brought it back up to a 7. I was like, okay, it ended on a high note. But I do like that as kind of counter-programming to a lot of Van Damme's normal stuff, even like his kind of big sci-fi action stuff and like his martial arts movies. This is kind of good, a little bit different along the lines of stuff like Lionheart and some of the stuff he did later in the 2000s period that's like different. And it's a bit more of a range for him. He gets to stretch a little bit more. But one thing I'm stuck on a little bit is that like yeah, they did a pretty good job kind of retrofitting this to be a Van Damme movie, but like as we kind of brought up, like this movie could have worked just as well, maybe even a little better with someone like a Kurt Russell in there or some
Yeah.
other kind of star. Like they maybe wouldn't have had to tweak it quite so much to kind of suit Van Damme's sensibilities and like, his acting style and stuff. But I still think it's a really strong film. And again, for the few Van Damme films that I haven't seen, most of those are because I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do that one. But this one, I kind of flew under my radar, and I'm really glad I saw it because it's really entertaining. Like I said, I think it's a good, strong, solid 7 for me.
Fantastic. Fantastic.
Okay, so as we're wrapping things up here, what you got to plug, sir? You're involved with a million different things.
Oh
Please
my
tell
goodness.
everyone about it.
Oh my goodness. Let me go to films first, I guess. I work for a company called Dead End Films, and what we do is this is a company that is brought together by 4 filmmakers who have been, let's just say, not really. We're trying to get along with people again and try to collaborate. We haven't had very good experiences collaborating with people, and so the 4 of us decided to get together and to start a company. We have 4 scripts on the table. One of them is one of the most personal thing I have ever written, and we're all going to direct one of them. If you go to deadendfilms.org, check us out. All of the stuff is there. And so we're in the development phase here now, and we'll get into promotional phase within the next couple of months. But I'm really, really excited about the things we have. We have some really cool things coming. We have a horror anthology in the vein of Trick or Treat. Some really cool things coming. So Dead End Films. Now, podcast-wise, I am a member of a site called BingeMedia.net. If you know of a show called the Joe Blow Movie Show from way back when, that was hosted by a couple guys by the name of Jim Law and Johnny Moreno. They have branched out. They have done BingeMedia.net. They started that, and I was more than honored when they brought me on board. I do my own show over there. It's released every Friday. It's called the Binge Movie Aftertaste, where we do a lot of things like what Marcus is doing with the Van Damme series here. We get retrospectives going, and every once in a while I will pepper in an interview or two. I've interviewed Guinevere Turner. We've interviewed, like I said,
I'm
yeah,
gonna check that out.
Oh
really
yeah,
like Guinevere Turner.
She's fantastic, and me and her have become kind of friends since. She's a really cool chick, and she's got great stories about American Psycho, and her Blood Rain stories are something that need to be heard.
Yeah, she seems like she would make a great interview subject, so I'm definitely going to check that out.
She's fantastic. She's fantastic. And, I do pepper in interviews every once in a while, but what I love about doing the podcast is I love talking about movies, and I love dissecting movies. And these are all movies that we grew up with, and right now we're in the midst. We just got through doing The Godfather, and now we're doing A Nightmare on Elm Street. And it's fun to just go through these movies one by one and talk about them. So if you go to bingemedia.net, my podcast in particular is called the Binge Movie Aftertaste. But please check out, they have game casts on there. They have sports casts if you're into sports. And the Binge Cast, which I was just a part of, it is usually 4 or 5 hours. Yes, we record for 4 or 5 hours. And we start drinking in the beginning of the show, and by the end, there's at least somebody who either blacks out or yells and screams at the others, but it's all in good fun. They are great guys, and their podcasts are pretty fantastic. And again, I was just honored when they asked me to be a part of them. So bingemedia.net, deadendfilms.org. So please check those out. And I want to thank Marcus, man. This is something that I got to be honest, I wasn't sure what to expect. Me and you, we've been talking back and forth for a bit now. For about a year, we've been in the same amount of movie groups, and we've been talking back and forth about doing something, and I didn't know what to expect. But, dude, this was a blast, and I'd be more than honored to come on again.
I would love to have you on again, and everything you're doing, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm glad I can have some kind of semblance of professionalism because I am just a dude sitting in his bedroom right now with a mic and a laptop, but I'm trying to make it work.
Please, dude. If you go to bingemedia.net, we are anything but professional. It's all it's constructed chaos is what it is over there. That's what I like to call it, and I wouldn't have it any other way, though. They are great guys.
Great. Well, thank you again, Garrett. I
Thanks,
really
Marcus.
appreciate you being here today. And of course, you can follow Jean-Claude Van Damme on Twitter. We're at pod_Dam. And of course, you can find us at Crust Celluloid, Facebook, YouTube, all that garbage. So yeah, and we'll see you here next time on Jean-Claude Van Damme.